Today, we are going to deal with the psychosocial issues, and the faculty for today's session is Ms. Mukta Dhavalikar, who is a registered clinical psychologist and has done her MPhil in clinical psychology from Ahmedabad Institute of Medical Sciences. She has her own practice in addition to be working as a consultant clinical psychologist at Vilasa Palliative Care Center in Goa. So welcome, Mukta, and it's over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. Yes. Sripriya, are you there? Will you be able to share the slides?
Yes, Mr. Anup is helping us out from the hub side, so he'll be sharing the screen. Anup, can we have the share screen, please?
Yeah, ma'am. Yeah, ma'am. Is it visible?
Yes. Anu, please start the slide. Yes. Okay. Yes. Okay. All right. So let's begin. It's very heartening to see all of you here. Knowing that this is basically this field is very close to my heart, and it's very good to see more and more people stepping into this with all the upcoming programs that Parliament India keeps on conducting. And so before we get into this, I would also like to know, considering that you all have been introduced to the basics of what is palliative care, and you all might have some idea of it. So can somebody just unmute and tell me, or just put it in the chat, what you know about it? What is palliative care? It's not an exam. We won't be judging you, giving you marks. I just want to know what is your understanding of it, so that we have a baseline, and then I can take it from there. So it's absolutely okay if you give imperfect, incorrect answers also.
Palliative care is the treatment modality aimed at reducing or alleviating the suffering of a patient of a life-limiting illness. And it considers
Absolutely.
all 4 aspects: physical, social, spiritual, and psychosocial.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you, sir. Anybody else would like to give it a go?
The WHO definition states that it's an approach that improves the quality of life for patients and their relatives who are facing life illness by means of relief and alleviation of suffering through early detection, impeccable assessment, and treatment of pain and other symptoms, physical, psychosocial, and spiritual.
Right. Absolutely. We also have some answers here in the chat box. We all are talking about improving quality of life, and about life-limiting illnesses. Absolutely right. So if we had to look at the definition, sir has already given it to us. We are looking at palliative care in terms of treatment which is aimed at improving quality of life of patients and their families who are facing problems associated with life-limiting illnesses. It prevents and relieves suffering through early identification, correct assessment, and treatment of pain and other problems. Now, these other problems might be physical, psychosocial, or spiritual. Right. But let's move away from this definition a little bit. And instead of theoretically understanding this, let's look at what we do on a day-to-day basis. At our workplaces, what do we do? Even without actively working in palliative care settings, working as a medical professional, we would have all witnessed people suffering. So what is it that we see? Going into our OPDs, into our hospitals, wards, clinics, what is it that we see first? When we see a patient or when we see people waiting outside, what do we see? Is it just physical pain? What is it that the first thing that you notice about a person who is suffering from an illness?
Worry and anxiety.
Worry and anxiety, absolutely. Anything else? Very simply put, they look unhappy, right? They're not happy. They look emotionally distressed. The emotional distress might be like this is There's a variety of ways that a person expresses emotional distress, worry and anxiety being one of them. Some of them might be crying, some of them might look scared, some might be restless, pacing up and down. So we realize that the patient is not only in physical pain and distress, there's also a component of psychological, social, spiritual distress along with it. And the quality of life is really hampered. Can we go to the next slide? Yes. So, and when I say quality of life is really hampered, they are unable to do basic things which they once did so efficiently, things which added value to their life, like earning for themselves and their loved ones, feeling good in mind and body, being able to do things that they love, go out, play, spend time with friends, enjoy eating good food. So much, like so many little things which add quality to their life are either lost or reduced. And palliative care is all about looking into these aspects along with pain and symptom management, right? So we talk about holistic, whole person care. We talk about psychological well being, spiritual well being, emotional well being, and social well being. And apart from the fact that illness affects well being in all these areas, we should also not forget that the mind body connection is a two-way connection. We might all be aware of this. We might all be aware of the mind body connection. We might have spoken about it also. So, just the way body affects the mind also affects the body. Hence, psychological, social, and spiritual well being will have an impact on physical well being as well. Sometimes, to the extent that we might see that it's affecting the disease trajectory also. And again, the caring, next slide, please. Okay. The caring is not only limited to the patient per se, we are caring for the caregivers as well. The patient, their family, their children. Why is that? Why is family the unit of care? What do you think?
They are
Let's
the
keep
closest to the
it
patient.
very open. Sorry?
They are the closest to the patient.
Closest to the patient. Okay, yes.
Even their
Decision-making
day-to-day life,
Sorry?
even the day-to-day life of the family and caregivers is also much affected with the patient,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
and
cannot
there's
see your loved
emotional.
ones. You cannot see your loved ones in pain.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Also, the patient's symptoms and how the family is coping with the illness are not really unrelated to each other. Both need to be addressed because that's healthier for both. I'll give you an example. A life threatening diagnosis, right? Do you think it's traumatic for a 37-year-old woman if she receives a life threatening diagnosis? Yes, it is definitely going to be traumatic. Is it also equally traumatic for her 40-year-old husband if his wife at a very young age is receiving such a diagnosis? What about her 10-year-old child and her aging mother? Right? So, this is a family crisis. It's not an individual, independent crisis that we're talking about. The emotional and physical resources, right from the money and savings to their ability to deal with stress and their resilience, all these resources of the entire family are threatened. It's a family crisis, as I said. The patient is not isolated, especially in the Indian context. They are very much a part of a family system. And this person's psychosocial physical health is going to impact the family's health and vice versa. You might also have seen patients with terminal illnesses who have spouses suffering from depression or some other psychosomatic symptoms where their health also deteriorates post this patient's diagnosis. Losses that are suffered by the patient are also losses suffered by the family. For example, patients who lose their role as the head of the family is also equally the family's loss of a primary breadwinner. Now, in addition, due to inadequate understanding about what palliative care is, even a referral to a palliative care service is experienced as a crisis by the family. So, family centered care, where the healthcare team, the patients, and their families have an equal partnership is the basis of the work that we do in any palliative care setting. Right? Next slide. So you might agree with me on this that it's not only a physical illness, there are other psychosocial issues, and it's the entire family which is facing these issues. Some of you might have a question about why you need to know about it. I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a social worker, I'm not a psychiatrist. What will I do? You need to know about this so that you can do the needful. Since it's a multidisciplinary team, we all need to be aware of the possible issues that can arise so that we identify, assess, we do our bit to support, and if needed, we can refer to a specialist. There is a psychosocial dimension to the work of all professionals who are involved in palliative care, and understanding this will only strengthen the practice of anybody who's working in this field. And considering that we are all medical professionals, we constantly are in touch with patients. We have very unique roles to play in psychosocial support. So, and one very, very important thing, even if you're not trained as a mental health professional, never ever underestimate the therapeutic value of listening empathetically to the story that your patient and their family is telling you. You need not be able to hand over solutions to them, but just being able to give them a space where they are heard, that itself is incredibly healing. And when I say healing, again, please do not misunderstand. You might wonder, are these patients going to heal if we are talking about removing it completely? Healing, on the other hand, the kind of healing that I'm talking about, is an acceptance of change. Not to look at themselves as sufferers, but to look at themselves in a different light, to seek personal resources to facilitate that change and to find the strength within to deal with it. That's what I mean by healing. And you can promote this healing in a big way if you're aware of the psychosocial issues that they can be facing. So let's first look at what are the psychosocial spiritual issues which can arise in this context so that you'll be able to identify them in your patients. Along with that, let's also look at what can be done to assess the extent of distress and then treat it. Now, it's not really possible to separate out these issues into psychological, social, and spiritual. We cannot really put them into clear cut boxes. We can only do it up to an extent because these are pretty much overlapping. So, when we're discussing a particular issue, it will have psychological aspects, social aspects, and also spiritual aspects in varying degrees. Right? So, let's go to the first one. Anu, next slide, please. And then the next one. The next one. Okay, yeah. So the first thing we're talking about is communication. This is again one of the first issues that comes up or we notice in our patients. Communication and breaking the bad news. I won't go into the details of how to and the protocols of how to break bad news, etc. Because you might have already not. You will be having a session on it. So instead of getting into that into protocol,
not clear. It keeps interrupting.
do it hurriedly. We are
Oh, probably net problem.
hello. Somebody had put in the chat box that they can't hear me. So
Yes, your voice was breaking and in between the periods of no audio.
okay, just a second. Now is it clear or is it still breaking?
It's clear now.
And
No audio now.
Okay, so in terms of communication,
Cannot
if we
hear
don't
anything.
Okay, okay. Okay, all right. So if we do this hurriedly and if we do not let people, if we don't communicate properly about what to expect when they come into palliative care settings, it can cause further problems, arguing, non-compliance with treatment if people have misconceptions about the diagnosis and treatment. So supporting and educating the family is really vital. It's important that they have an adequate understanding of the illness and the expected process. It's very important that we give enough time to address everyone's concerns about it and help them communicate clearly amongst themselves. Speaking of communication issues within the family, even the most functional families find it very difficult to talk openly about this. They naturally tend to hide feelings, etc., to protect family members from feeling hurt. Training, my work was with pediatric cancer patients, and I've seen innumerable parents who would often hide their own pain and sadness and fear from their child. Now, they did it with a very valid reason. They did it to stay strong for their child. But children sense hidden restlessness and anxiety, hiding something, and that's even more unsettling and scary. So, usually, there is no choice about whether or not to tell them because one, they read emotions around them, they notice adults talking in hushed voices, quickly wiping their tears. They respond to body language. They can see sympathy in people's eyes, and they're aware of changes in routine. They realize that mama doesn't drop me to school anymore. My auntie packs my tiffin now. All of these things. So, honest and open communication in a way and in a language that children will understand is the key in this case. And we need to help parents see that if they are misguided in their attempts to protect their children from harm. Right? Because by doing this, they are actually causing more harm rather than preventing it from happening. So, one of our major roles is in facilitating open communication and expression between members and between families and treating teams. Now, the second issue that we come across is predominantly social in nature. Next slide, please, Anu. Yes. And that is loss. Losses that are experienced by patients, we're not only talking about loss of life. Uh, there are losses in relation to their social world, concerned with their engagement with the world outside home, with the roles and relationships in the family and outside of the family. There's a loss of future, loss of social engagement, loss of self-esteem, which is associated with that identity. For example, loss of my role as a teacher is associated with so many things: a loss of financial independence, a meaningful contribution to society, a loss of living according to my values, my confidence in my role. So much of our self-concept is linked to who we are and what we do in a social context. So without that, we might not even know who we are. So as mobilities and energies decline, it becomes harder for the patient to participate in social events and to maintain friendships that were built on shared activities and interests. Social isolation is a frequent source of social pain for both the patient and the carer. And in some cases, it is possible to an extent to get them to meet friends or colleagues, to have meaningful interactions with them, and to make up for the loss in some way. But for some, the change in the way they feel about themselves and the declining functioning creates such a huge gap between their past social engagement and the present limitations and conditions. And for these people, getting them to engage or re-engage in the previous groups is really not possible. And here a solution might be to participate in new social groups altogether instead of trying to integrate back into older groups. Let's say, for example, there are so many cancer support groups. or other, dementia support groups, where they can both learn how others deal with a changed identity, compare their own situation, and continue to feel that they can make a contribution, especially with patients who say that they have stopped talking to people because they hate the look of sympathy or pity in their eyes, that people hesitate in sharing good news, that they don't talk about anything else but treatments. Such kinds of experiences could lead to a feeling of being left out or being unable to connect with those who are unaffected and going about their previous routines. And this can also lead the person to withdraw further, causing themselves more and more pain and hurt. Along with the patient, the carers will also have a changed identity. So they may be struggling to sustain other commitments to a job or to other needy family members. They might have put life on hold as they put the needs of the dying person first. Man is a social animal. You might have witnessed caregivers helping each other in hospitals, striking up a friendship, and they do so very, very naturally because of their need to connect socially. And because they feel understood, there is a sense of connection. So, support groups can really help when it comes to social pain, a loss of social identity, and a loss of social engagement. Right, the next thing we are talking about is unfinished business. Anup, next slide, please. Yes. Um, does anybody want to say what unfinished business is? You might have already heard about this and know about this. So, what do you think is unfinished business?
Conflict with siblings or relatives.
Mhm.
They have lots
Okay.
of plans for the future and they get disrupted.
Right, right, absolutely. Yes. So, unfinished business is basically can be anything which is
Partition of wealth.
pending, which is left sorry.
Like parents have plans for their kids' weddings, and younger people have
Right.
professional plans.
Absolutely.
Partition of
Absolutely.
wealth.
Absolutely. Yes. 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 And all these things, you're all right. And all these things can lead to considerable distress. And this distress can manifest in many different ways. It can come out as restlessness, as anxiety, discomfort, guilt, helplessness. And they can be about so many things. They can be about dreams and ambitions. Basically, any sort of plan for life, which is going to be, not taken to fruition. For example, building their own house, taking care of financial commitments, as somebody put it, repaying loans, etc. And how to identify this? It's very simple. You just have to keep your ears open and notice. If you hear for patients' regrets, you would most likely get to know about their unfinished business. For example, if you hear somebody saying, I wish I had not stopped talking to my sister, because looking back, it seems like such a trivial matter when faced with the possibility that I'll never be able to talk to her again. What do you get to know from this? What does this tell you? That reconciliation, maybe asking for forgiveness, is an unfinished business. Being able to complete that would bring some peace to this patient. Now, mostly unfinished business would be a major concern in younger patients in their prime who have children who are small, still studying or not settled on their own, or who have parents who are aging. And here, the unfinished business would be revolving around their responsibilities as a parent towards the children and as grown up children towards their parents. Now, in this context, the most common emotional distress would come from feelings of guilt, of not being there for them, and anxieties about how they will cope on their own without them to take care of. Now, here, let me tell you a story of a very strong patient whom we lost. I think this example will help illustrate all the 3 points that we have discussed so far: communication, loss, and unfinished business. And it will also help you see what I mean when I say that these factors are overlapping. We can't really say that they're independent of each other. So, this patient, a lady in her 30s, she was diagnosed with an illness only to know that it was in the terminal stage, that there was no curative treatment which was available at this point. And it was sudden, shocking, and she was faced with a loss of identity as a young professional. She had to leave her job. As days passed, she quickly deteriorated, becoming more and more dependent on others for even her basic needs. She could not bathe herself, needed help to walk to the toilet. So there was a loss of dignity also, which was especially painful for her to bear at such a young age when nobody is prepared mentally for something like this. There was a loss of role because one, she had to give up her job, and second, because she was a mother, she had two young children, one barely a toddler who couldn't even walk yet, and she couldn't fulfill her role as a mother. So her family was extremely supportive in all of this. They reassured her that they would take care of her children. So there was no anxiety per se regarding that, but there was the pain of leaving them behind, not being able to, be there for them, to see them grow up. It was something that she was leaving unfinished. There wasn't much that could be done to help her complete the task, so to say, unlike other unfinished tasks, like, the one which we saw in the earlier example of reconciliation, which was just a matter of a phone call. But in this case, there was barely anything that we could have done. But what the patient did here was she asked her child to be brought to the hospital, her elder child, extremely attached to her, a girl 12 years old. And she sat with her and she told her how ill she was. She explained to the child what a terminal illness means, what stage her illness was at, and she cried with her child and she told her that she loved her and that she'll always love her. As a palliative care professional, when she told me this, my first thought was that was such a beautiful, difficult, and brave thing to do. But that was not how her family felt. When she was telling her daughter this, her family had tried in all ways to stop her, constantly saying that she shouldn't be saying things like this, questioning why she was putting her child through this and why she was putting herself through this, and that she was hurting her daughter, etc., etc. So, and that really disturbed her. So, why she had asked for me to come and see her was she had a question of whether she was being a bad parent by doing this. Somewhere she knew the answer herself because she told me, I know they didn't want me to say it. This is a verbatim quote. I know they didn't want me to say it, but it's the truth. I very strongly needed to say it. And the reason why she decided to tell was one, she didn't want it to come as a shock for her child that suddenly one day her mother was gone. And two, she said, if I hadn't told then, I don't know if I would have gotten the chance to tell her that I loved her, that I wasn't abandoning her. Here comes the issue of communication. The family trying to protect the child didn't want her to know that her mother was going to go. But as research with children of deceased parents shows us, it is best for the child to be involved in and given a choice to say goodbye. The ideal steps for us to follow here in this situation would have been to find out from the child what she already knew, picking up on the cues from the atmosphere. Secondly, to help her mother communicate with her, if necessary, reassuring the mother that this was good parenting to give her child knowledge of what was happening. And thirdly, help her identify sources of support for the child. And this patient intuitively did all of that. Her only request had been to us to help her child through the process of understanding the loss and supporting the child through it once she was gone. And in doing what she did, in telling the child and making the request to us, she did indeed take care of her unfinished business to the best of her ability in that situation. And when we validated her decision to communicate with her child, and when we assured that we would talk to her and we would be there for her, she could give us a genuine smile. And that was the last I saw of her. Many a times, families are not ready to have this conversation. They would rather protect the child. But what they don't realize is by keeping them ignorant, we are doing just the opposite of protecting them. We are making them more vulnerable. We are not opening up doors for them to ask their doubts, to prepare themselves for what's to come, and to ensure that they don't blame themselves, which children often do. So Moving on, so far we saw communication, loss, and unfinished business. The next is a very, very practical issue. Anu, next slide. Yes. That is financial problems. And as we look into a comprehensive psychosocial assessment, we also inquire about financial concerns. Many a times, as people undergo long treatments over years without any money coming in, it drains out much of their savings. Some of them might be from a poor financial background to begin with. So, financial issues is a very real concern. And why are we addressing it under psychosocial issues? Because it is a source of distress for many. It can even stop them from help seeking. There might be fear and anxiety about it, which again means they might not respond very well to our treatment if these underlying causes of anxiety are not addressed. So, talk about it. For some who have been well off until then, receiving charity, so to say, or asking for financial help can be extremely difficult, and it can lead to a loss of self esteem. So, there are so many different kinds of distress associated with financial issues. What is our role? To talk it out with them, listen to their perceptions, how they feel about taking financial help. Is there something that stops them? Secondly, to get them in touch with agencies that can provide aid. Especially if you have MSWs who are working in your setups, they can definitely help with this. For example, at the LASA, the place where I consult, we have the Cancer Society aid, which is available, and the decision makers are informed about it right at admission so that they can complete the formalities and start receiving the aid as soon as possible. And again, here, when I say the decision makers, it is important that all those who are involved in the treatment know about this aid. Let me again give you an example. We had a patient who got admitted, and then immediately after admission, he started insisting that he wants to be taken home, very adamant about it. He had a young son who was working, just began working. And the nurses inquired with him whether he was not happy with the care that he was receiving. Was his pain not being managed the way he expected? Basically, they tried to find out what was the reason that he so desperately wanted to leave. And then we realized that he was troubled, thinking that this is a private hospital and it is going to cost a lot and we can't afford it. Being a proud man, he felt ashamed to share this with the treating team. He told his wife, though, and she told her son. Now, what the son did was he just kept reassuring the father that you don't think about it, I'll take care of it, I'll manage it. And this, the patient felt, was just a false reassurance. He felt this is such a young boy, just began working. How was he going to deal with this? Once we got to know this, and once he was told about the aid and how it worked and how much he'll have to pay in actual, he was much more relaxed and he decided to continue with the treatment. So ensure that you involve the patient as much as possible in the decision-making process, not just in terms of finances. Otherwise, as well, this will really help them maintain their sense of autonomy in their lives. And that is very important when we are talking about loss of dignity in patients with life-limiting illnesses. Next, we spiritual issues. Anu, next slide. Yes. As research tells us, spiritual well-being is one of the most important influences on quality of life at the end of life. Now, when I say spiritual issues, some of these are social spiritual issues as well with an overlap, as we said. Patients may experience a number of spiritual issues. It's not just limited to lack of meaning. It does include lack of meaning, but there are so many other things. There is guilt, hopelessness, loss of dignity, loneliness in this world, anger towards God, feeling abandoned by God, feeling out of control, grief. All of these come under spiritual suffering. And it's not only limited to religiosity or faith, it goes beyond that. As one nears end of life or faces the reality of being mortal so closely, they might begin to have existential questions like what is the meaning of life? What is the purpose of life? And with that, they might also start to think about the past and start questioning what did I contribute to this world? What was my life worth? What am I leaving behind? And it's important to help them reminisce, to look at their past trumps. What have they achieved? It can be something as simple as raising good children or being a valued employee of their company, knowing what they did was valued is what will keep hopelessness at bay and in turn depression at bay. So reminiscing past trumps and knowing that what they did was valued is extremely important here. Next slide, please. Yes. So this is a time when we start reviewing the past, it puts the present in context and it can be very affirming to the dying person. And this can be done in several ways. For some people, it might just be informally talking with family and friends, and that might well give them the opportunity to go over the past, the trumps and the tragedies, and to receive confirmation from them that their contribution has been valued in the family or the friend circle. For others, a more formal life review may be helpful in settling their anxieties, uncertainties. Formal life review processes have been developed in many parts of the world, and they are available online also. These questionnaires, sort of, where you have guides what to can so here again we had a patient never stopped. So we were also not very sure whether it was just psychogenic pain, where it was not really the complaining and the cribbing was what the only activity sort of that she was doing. And so she had a caregiver who was with her. And then for a few days, her grandson had come to stay with her, with his grandmother. And what we did was we spoke with him and we asked him to start reminiscing with his grandmother. And he started that. And he asked her about past incidences when she was young, how did she meet her husband, etc. All those things. And in all these 3 days that he was there, she didn't once complain of pain. And she so enjoyed the process of reminiscing with him and telling him stories of when she was his age, and just basically enjoying being in that in those days again. And this is not just, of course, this is just one example, but even if you go look at research, one very common thing we see is an improvement in life satisfaction and reduction in stress following such a review. And associated with life review can be a wish to leave a legacy or to be involved in planning for the future of loved ones. Some might want to have concrete gifts that they leave behind, a poem they wrote, a painting, a sari, a recipe book. A parent with young children who is dying may wish to leave a letter, an audio or videotape for the children to keep and refer to as they grow up. You can help them make memory books with messages, pictures, other small souvenirs. Basically, something personal for all the things that they would miss. Any material which concentrates on demonstrating the value of the child for that parent and reminders of times that they shared is likely to be greatly treasured. And just try putting yourselves in the child's shoes and think, if not just a child, even at this age, if you had to lose a loved one, and if they had kept something personal and beautiful for you as a gift, how would you feel about that? And wouldn't that be very, very precious for you, something that you'll cherish for life? So that is very important. It might seem very small, but very, very important. And we need to bring it up because patients are not going to think about this by themselves. Making a will is another way of ensuring that your wishes continue to carry weight after your death. This is, again, something that we might struggle a little bit with because patients are not very much, many times not ready to talk about it and to get it done because it seems very, very final to some of them. But we need to make sure that we have at least done our part, and we make sure to tell them how important doing this is and why. Apart from this, spirituality, very simply put, is being connected to something greater than our own self, right? A higher power. Again, not necessarily God, not limited to religion. But here, assessing the patient's spiritual beliefs, assessing the importance of spirituality in their life, and exploring whether they belong to a spiritual community is something we need to do. And don't assume, though, assess if spirituality is important for the person, never assume. And once you have assessed, ascertain how important and helpful it is. A simple question is often sufficient. Is your faith or spirituality or religion important or helpful to you? And how important is it? This could be, after this, there could be a follow up question of, are there ways in which we can support you in your spiritual practice? Um, why ask this? Because again, patients don't really realize that we might be able to take care of these spiritual needs and that we also consider these needs important. Again, there was a patient at the Lhasa who would, before coming to the hospital and before becoming bedridden, he visited a local temple every day in the evening. That was a part of the social fabric of his life as well, where he met his neighbors. And when we inquired if he had noticed when he was brought in that we had a small place of worship in the hospital, he said yes, but he was bedridden. And we asked if he being able to go see that place of worship in the evening and sit and pray there for some time would help in any way. He said yes. It was just a matter of arranging for a wheelchair to take him to the next room. It had never occurred to him that he could ask for it from a hospital and that the hospital staff would be willing to do something about it. So interventions need not be complicated. They need not be about super brain science. Mostly they just need to be compassionate and human for them to work. How does this help? Mostly for those who believe in it, concepts like transcendence, soul, liberation, reincarnation, these can all help patients deal with dying to make meaning out of it. It can also help reduce suffering and facilitates acceptance of the situation. As we said, acceptance being a major part of healing. This acts as a buffer against distress, particularly hopelessness, helplessness, loneliness, depression, and death anxiety. Now, when I say transcendence, belief in a higher power beyond human existence, it will enable connectedness, removes the isolation of suffering because it sets it within a larger landscape. It brings people closer to sources of ultimate meaning. And if you go to see religious traditions, not limited to a particular country or a region, globally, religious traditions have their own interpretations of suffering, and many have practices which enable people to transcend their own suffering and their immediate selves through prayer, through meditation, through various rituals. So this is definitely going to help them if you know that a person has spiritual inclination. Uh, Even for the family, rituals post death is how the family makes sense of the loss. So acts of remembrance can really aid in processing grief if you go to look at it scientifically. But make sure that you're not letting your own beliefs interfere in any way. You're not pushing the patient in any way to engage or to not engage in spiritual practice. It is our job to respect the patient's spiritual orientation or a lack of it, both. And to encourage spiritual practice if a person is already engaging in it or would like to engage in it, but not to push those who do not. So our job is to ensure that patients are given the opportunity and space to express their spiritual beliefs and practices, if any. Next is grief and bereavement. Next one, yeah. Grief is, as we all know, the emotional response associated with any kind of loss. It's an inevitable dimension of our humanity, right? It's an adaptive adjustment process, one that can be approached with courage if there is proper support which is available. So intervention is not always warranted or required. For the majority, although bereavement is painful, their personal resilience will ensure that normal adaptation takes place. So there's no justification for routine intervention for grief because normal grief is not pathological. So let's not pathologize it. But as the patient and the family journeys through palliative care, the clinical phases of grief also progress. Next slide, please. Yes. From anticipatory grief through the immediate news of the death to the stages of acute grief, and for some, the complications of bereavement. Features of, let's first look at what is normal grief. Yeah, the middle portion, so that we know what not to pathologize. Yeah, next slide, please. So features of normal grief are emotional waves of distress, unavoidable crying, preoccupation with thoughts of the deceased, reduced concentration, other somatic symptoms like restlessness, numbness, weight loss, fatigue, behavioral symptoms like social withdrawal or seeking consolation. Here we just need to be a supportive presence. If we see all of this happening, we just need to be a supportive presence. Let them know that we are available to help if they ever feel the need to. But sometimes active intervention is required when we see some abnormal patterns. Now, when we say abnormal patterns, one is, next slide, please. Anticipatory grief. Anticipatory grief precedes death. It results from the expectation of that event itself. So expecting that it's going to happen itself leads to a grief reaction. There are some common difficulties which can emerge with this. There might be impaired coping, where the family members might deny the seriousness of it, or they might withdraw, they might not be involved, they might show anger. And our role here is to encourage them to express their feelings openly, to help them recognize that saying goodbye is a process and that there are going to be opportunities to celebrate the life of the patient before they have to say goodbye. And not just to celebrate the life, but to express gratitude, to take care of unfinished business, to reminisce on the way. So they need to, really, many times they will require multiple sessions with a psychologist if you have any. Next, we have complicated grief. Can we have the next slide? Next one. Yes. So when we say complicated grief, it represents a pathological outcome involving psychological, social, or physical morbidity also. Prolonged grief with difficulty accepting the loss and meaninglessness, even 6 months or more after the loss. Up to 6 months is absolutely normal, but more than that will move to pathology associated with poorer physical and mental health outcomes and even suicidality. This is when active intervention is immediately required. In that, we also have inhibited and delayed grief, which is an avoidant form of complicated grief, where basically we see a person being absolutely normal, normal actually, immediately post the news. And then much later, we see a delayed grief reaction. So they inhibit the grief initially, and then much later we'll see the grief reaction coming up. So that is a type of complicated grief. Another one is what we call disenfranchised grief, or the hidden sorrow of the marginalized. So basically for those people who have less social permission to express the dimensions of their loss. Now this could be seen in homosexual partners or in extramarital relationships, etc., where there is less social acceptance of their grief. Now, complicated grief is more likely in untimely, sudden traumatic deaths, when there is a lack of support systems in place, or when there are previous vulnerabilities which exist, or there is a dependent relationship. Moving on, we come to psychological issues, purely psychological issues. The most common ones which we are definitely aware of is anxiety, depression, and body image issues, especially including loss of attractiveness, loss of sexual needs not being met, etc., especially in cases like cancer. And also issues of self-esteem and self-worth related to issues of social role and identity. But we can basically put it all under the umbrella term of distress. Now, what is distress? An unpleasant emotional experience of a social or psychological nature, which is tied to and interferes with the ability to effectively cope with illness and illness-related treatment. Now, making of a psychiatric diagnosis and are difficult for many reasons. One problem is that psychiatric symptomatology is many a times mimicked by side effects of medication or the disease process itself. And that is one of our major hurdles. Next slide, please. With the next one. Yes. So here I have included a table which gives you key components of diagnosis of major depression, anxiety disorder, and adjustment disorder, and how to differentiate amongst them. So you can always refer back to this table. I've also included a link to a video here, which is quite a lengthy session, but it will definitely help you in to avoid misdiagnosis basically and under identification of psychiatric disorders, which is highly prevalent. So being able to identify and assess is very important for all of us in psychiatric illnesses. And in a drive to address this in the context of cancer care, specifically the NCCN, National Comprehensive Cancer Network in UK, they have promoted development of brief and rapid screening tools for distress, which can be administered by any professional, even a non-specialist. Okay, so the next slide, please. And this is one of the common ones which is used, which is the distress thermometer, quite an extensively used and very easy to use resource. One thing that remains untreated mostly and unrecognized is depression, very frequently unrecognized. Next slide, please. Okay, yeah. So first of all, the most common, as I said, diagnostic difficulty is how to interpret the physical or somatic symptoms that patients present in the context of possible depression, right? So how do we distinguish whether these symptoms are part of the depression syndrome or a direct biological result of advancing illness, especially cancer? So it's always better to be on the safe side, to be suspicious and refer to a specialist. Again, occasional thoughts of suicide are quite common, but frequent and persistent presence of these thoughts would indicate a presence of psychiatric complications. Many a times when assessing risk and intent, it is the need for control over death, which needs to be acknowledged here. Always better to be done by specialists though. Again, nursing staff, which you have, has a very important role in identifying patients who have psychiatric symptoms. They spend more time in direct patient contact, which enables them to observe behavior more closely. And the nature of intimate nursing tasks gives them an opportunity for the patients to express any psychological distress. So they might not be able to identify specific disorders, but they will definitely be skillful in recognizing significant psychological distress, which you can then try to identify or to refer. And so how do we establish if a patient is depressed and requires treatment or further assessment? There are so many different preliminary screenings which are available, like the face scale or the distress thermometer, etc. And there are also clinician rating scales which clinicians use, like the caregiver burnout or the problem scale or the BDI, etc. But again, it is when I speak of screening tools or scales, not all can be generally used because not all are valid in the palliative care setting. Research suggests that one, the Edinburgh Depression Scale is quite useful, so is BDI, and so is Zoom Self-Rating Depression Scale. So, but use scales with discretion always. And many times what happens is in case of palliative care, patients might be unwilling to discuss symptoms or unable to discuss symptoms. And we might go and ask the caregiver. Research shows that asking caregivers is extremely unreliable because their ratings are closer to their own distress rather than the patient's distress. So it's always going to be colored by their experience and perception of the illness. So it's better to not do the rating scales for the patient or asking these questions to the caregiver. Instead, it's always better to use something like a face scale, which doesn't require the patient to verbalize. Right? And also, might sound unreal, but just asking a simple question, are you depressed, is considered to be the most reliable predictor of depression, clinical depression in palliative care settings. A lot of studies show this. So it'll always help you gauge the emotional temperature by just asking, right? It's always helpful to assess this at admission, but just like any other physical symptom, keep an eye out for appearance of new symptoms or any exacerbation in symptoms. Next one, please. All members of the healthcare team may observe and subjectively report distress that they feel is psychological in nature, like fear or anger, or is psychologically mediated, like pain or breathlessness. This may or may not meet the criteria of a discrete psychological disorder, doesn't matter. Because regardless of the etiology, regardless of the diagnostic label, we are ultimately talking about the patient's subjective distress, which we need to help with. Now, next slide. Here are just some, I know we are running short on time. So just some final pointers about what our patients really need, what your patients need. The psychosocial aspects of care of the dying person, whatever the diagnosis, will include the need for understanding of symptoms, the nature of disease, the process of dying, of acceptance, regardless of their mood, regardless of their sociability, regardless of their appearance, feeling accepted. Self-esteem, as I said, involves them in decision-making. Fourth is safety, feeling secure. Fifth is belonging, a wish to feel needed, to not feel like a burden. Love, and when I say love, expressions of affection and human contact, touch, very, very important. Seventh is spirituality, an explanation of meaning and purpose, both religious and non-religious. And eighth is hope. When I say hope, I don't mean hope for life, but hope for an improvement in any aspect of their life or living. And in the provision of psychosocial care for people at the end of life, each of these needs must be identified and addressed. The next slide, please. And final do's and don'ts. Definitely be honest and trustworthy. Do not make false promises, give false information or reassurances. Respect people's right to make their own decisions and don't pressure them into telling you about how they're feeling, etc. Set aside your own biases. Make it clear to affected people that even if they refuse to help now or refuse help now from you, they can always access help in the future. Don't judge them for how they're acting or feeling if they refuse your help. Don't talk about yourself or personal issues or troubles to them. Even trying to, say that, I also went through this and stuff like that. Never do that. Ensure confidentiality unless issues mentioned affect the safety of the individual or others. Always provide information and never philosophize, moralize, preach, or impose your own religious perspectives onto the patient. Next slide. So, as you see, most of these needs are not about you being able to provide technical therapeutic expertise, but about being a non-judgmental, compassionate presence who is witness to their suffering, who is giving them space to express their distress, and who's accompanying them on their journey, trying to help add life to their days, not simply days to their lives. Thank you. I think we also have a case presentation.
Thank you.
Right, Anu?
I think we can have one or two questions if anybody wants to ask. Anu, please answer the presentation. Yes, Dr. Ravikiran.
Patient is thriving.
Dr. Ravikiran, please.
Sir, I would like to know how the spiritual care being addressed. Like we have a scale for spiritual care, hope or the FICA. So if we use this, how can we translate that into an objectively like an NRS scale or a DT, as in the Likert scale? How can we translate that into a Likert scale, the FICA or the hope? How can we address that spiritual care?
Okay, so first of all, why do you feel the need to translate the findings into a Likert scale?
When we want to assess the patient we have the NRS, and the time when the patient comes to the follow-ups, we know the patient from 10 by 10 has shifted to 9 by 10, 8 by 10, 7 by 10, or 3 by 10. Thereafter, we know that, yeah, the pain symptom, the physical pain symptom has been lessened and we can quantify it. But when we want to use the spiritual care in terms of that, I feel something resistance and also could not be into that way that I can translate. So I couldn't figure it out. How well can I be used?
Okay. So first of all, sir, when we are using a spiritual distress scale, it's not, I mean, it's always better, especially if you see resistance, to not check or use it for checking on progress. So it's always better to use it in terms of application, use it for any sort of intervention that you want to do with the patient to identify the areas which should be addressed in the spiritual intervention. But when we are looking at progress, it's always better to just use a general psychosocial distress rating, because that's much simpler even for the patient to do. So instead of using separate scales for spiritual, separate scales for psychological, instead of that, just use one single. So you can use something like a well-being scale, or you can just use a simple, straightforward self-made Likert scale also about just plain psychological distress. Just ask them, how distressed are you feeling? The simpler you keep it, the easier it is, the more reliable it is.
Okay, ma'am. Got it. Thank you.
Yes.
Dr. Dumble?
Good evening, ma'am. You had said that just ask the patient, are you depressed?
Yes.
So I mean, it's a two-part thing. If the patient is not literate, he's not going to understand depressed. And
Right.
even the most educated of people don't like to accept that they are depressed, because it's a stigma to, and it's a weak thing to be depressed. So how sure are we to get a truthful response?
No, when I say depressed, make sure you translate it into regional dialects. Kya aap udaas ho? Kya aap nirash ho? So, these are basically things that don't have as much stigma as clinical depression has. So when I say depressed, it's not just about, so make it understandable. You can change the language. That's not an issue. What I'm saying is be straightforward. Don't, घुमा फिरा के नहीं पूछना है.
But how sure can we be that they will agree and tell us that they are?
Okay. So see,
We
will
know as clinicians that they are looking.
Right.
But then
of course. No, when we look at these sources of information, we are never going to rely on one single source. It's never going to be only based on the rating scale, or only based on what the caregiver is telling me, only based on my observation, or only based on the question that the patient has answered. So we'll have to see what corroborates the most. Like, let's say out of 4, 3 of these channels are giving me the same answer. Then I'll go ahead with that answer. So never rely on
is
just
there
one
any scale
source.
for this also, for the depression?
Yes. I have mentioned that. I have
The
mentioned a few scales in the PPT also. Yeah. Now all
Edinburgh
these
scale.
scales are available. Yes,
But
they
which
are
one
available
would you
for free
recommend?
on.
The
I would
easiest and
recommend. I would recommend Edinburgh the most, because I mean, research shows that that's the most effective one in palliative care settings specifically. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes.
Dr. Radha, would you like to unmute and speak? Because I couldn't understand fully your
So, after knowing the diagnosis, patient starts crying. Even though the treatment started, she hasn't accepted and denying. What are the coping mechanisms for her?
Coping mechanisms in the sense, what we could give as coping mechanisms, you mean?
And depressed.
Ma'am, your voice is not clear.
Emotionally disturbed and crying continuously because she gave birth to 2 months, just 2 months ago, baby.
Okay.
And diagnosed with the neuroendocrine tumor.
Okay.
Just started chemotherapy and she's not able to accept that, and she's denying and she's crying.
Okay, ma'am. In this case, you might need to ask a professional to come in. If you do, you have a clinical psychologist in your setup or a psychiatrist?
Yes.
Yeah, because I mean, considering the situation, she will require immediate intervention. Basically, it's not something that we can just do some first aid. She will require probably long-term intervention.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Guidance to us. Okay. Thank you, madam.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. So I think we will move on to the patient story now, and if we have time, we can further ask questions at the. So Anu, please share the patient presentation. So today's patient story is presented by Dr. Veronica Matthews. Dr. Veronica.
So she had messaged that she might not be able to join as she is having urgent OT duty. So if
Okay.
somebody would volunteer on her behalf and read out.
So better you read out.
Okay,
Can I?
sure.
Yeah, please.
Okay. Yeah, it's the presentation of Dr. Veronica Matthews. Please, next slide. Next slide, please. Patient, 28 years old male, diagnosed as paraplegia due to traumatic spinal cord injury, ASIA-A. Next slide, please. Presenting complaints is a known case of traumatic spinal cord injury at the level of T12 to L1 vertebra 2 years ago. Presented with complaints of loose stools since 2 days, non-healing bed sores in gluteal region for the past 3 months. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. History of present illness. Patient was apparently well for 2 years ago when he had a fall from tree, post which he was unable to move both his lower limbs. He was diagnosed with paraplegia with traumatic injury at the level of T12 to L1 vertebra. He received his initial treatment in local hospital and underwent laminectomy. He was taught basic physiotherapy exercises, catheter care, pressure sore management. For the past 2 days, he was having loose stools, which was watery in consistency, no blood in stools, associated with abdominal pain. He also complained of bed sores for the past 3 months, for which daily dressings are being done at home, but still not healed. Next slide, please. Examination, general examination revealed his general condition is conscious, oriented to person, place, and time. Taylor positive, icterus negative. There is no clubbing, cyanosis absent, no lymphadenopathy, and edema. He was malnourished and bedridden. Systemic examination, chest bilateral clear. CVS S1, S2 sounds normal. Per abdomen, on palpation, soft, non-tender, and no hepatosplenomegaly. CNS paraplegia with loss of motor and sensory sensations below the level of L1. Next slide, please. Treatment and necessary investigations included CBC, CBC within the normal range, creatinine in the normal level, serum electrolytes, the 135 sodium, potassium 3.62, chloride 109, pH maintained. Oral antibiotics received Cipro 500 mg BD for 5 days, multivitamin, zinc, tablet Visilac, catheter care, bed sore dressing management, and multivitamin supplements with calcium and iron. Next slide, please. Psychosocial aspects. Psychological, he's having married life, unable to keep up with wife's expectations. Emotional, psychological, economical, and physical. Constantly worries if the treatment fails whether he will ever able to walk. Cost of living, deaths, financial constraints, apprehensive about his child's future, unable to provide education and nutrition. Socially, he was the only breadwinner of the family, now surviving on mother's widow pension or by selling saved grains. Semi-constructed brick house, not enough finance to complete. Support from his sister and brother-in-law has made things easier for him. Next slide, please. Medications, catheter care, bedsore dressings, physiotherapy, and supplements. Next slide. Main concerns: not able to walk, not able to take care of his family, thinks he is liability, financial debts, depressed, loneliness, isolated, no permanent source of income in the family. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Summary. A 28 years old young male, married with 2 kids, is diagnosed with paraplegia, traumatic spinal cord injuries, bedridden, is living in financial debt. He was the only sole earner of the family, not able to take care of his wife and support her, not able to provide education and proper nutrition to kids, surviving on widow mother's pension and some help from sister brother-in-law, thinks of himself as a liability, depressed, isolated, and lonely, has a constant fear that he might not be able to walk ever in his life, is recruited in our palliative care, and our palliative care team visits him and his family, help him with his dressings, catheter care, physiotherapy, baths, and provide him psychological counseling. Next slide, please. Discussion points. How can we help him? As a medical healthcare provider, in psychosocial aspects, how to help his wife to cope up with the situation, how to deal with his thoughts of being a liability, how to help him with his basic living standards, how to reduce his fear of his illness. He's a young patient, how to help him deal with his social stigmas. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Vikiran, for volunteer. So we have a young patient who is paraplegic, who is married and has 2 kids and has a lot of psychosocial problems. So the questions asked are, how can we help this family as a medical healthcare provider? And so probably in the physical aspects. So second question is in the psychosocial aspect. So I request the participants to answer the first question. What are the type of care you will provide in the physical aspect to this patient?
So probably we may need to collaborate with some psychologists or clinical psychologists, and we need to provide some counseling to improve his approach towards his illness, that is paraplegia.
Okay. Anybody else?
Financial aids are needed, sir. Financial aids for
Okay.
his, as well as for work for his wife, some employment for his wife, because he has 2 small children. So counseling for the husband and wife with the job for his wife, and aid from outside, some NGO organization.
Okay. So what are the
Initial-
as a medical person, how are you going to help?
We need to
Yeah.
we need to address his current physical problems. He's having diarrhea. That has to be addressed. The bed soap, that part, it has to be taken care of. So the physical aspects, then on to the psychological aspects and so on. So that part also needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
We need to ask him what are his major concerns and address those things, and tell him more about the disease and the process, whatever information he wants to know.
Okay. Here, when we look at the physical problems, he has diarrhea, as you told, he has pressure sore, and he has paraplegia. And he has a paraplegia occurred 2 years back. So probably the patient should have gained more power within this 2 years, but he did not. So the chance of being able to walk would be very minimal. And I think our focus should be to prevent the complications of paraplegia, to prevent prevent contractions, contractures. Then he is on Foley's catheter, so prevent urinary tract infection, prevent constipation. So all those should be the physical aspects of care. But what should be the psychosocial, or what are the ways in which we can help him in the psychosocial aspect?
So what was his profession? I mean, how was he working earlier as what?
We don't know because Dr. Veronica is not here.
So we couldn't get in touch with some NGOs and probably provide him with a wheelchair. So if he's ambulatory for the major part of the day, that can also alleviate the mood, that he's not all the time lying down in the bed, and some employment source needs to be generated so that he's working.
Okay.
Some rehabilitation steps. So some training, because he's upper part with hands, he can be able to do some activities. So that can help in some minor financial aid for the family.
Okay.
Training may be useful for these patients. Some skills to transform into the new, maybe that what I want to tell is the rehabilitation for paraplegia. Spinal patients, we have to.
Okay.
Don't know if physiotherapy can be of any help here.
So in this patient, as told, Dr. Raju.
Sir, ideally, I think we should listen to the patient the foremost concerns. Maybe it may be possible to find some kind of employment opportunity to the wife, and maybe if any help, education of that also can be considered. And certainly these things will ease a lot of distress. If not, the patient himself is unable to pursue any employment.
Yeah, thank you. Will physiotherapy help? For that, this patient has been paraplegic for the last 2 years. So probably usually the patients pick up more power during the first year of the incident. And this patient has finished 2 years. So probably he may not be able to walk like previously. So that's one thing. So physiotherapy we can give, it is to improve the strength of the upper body as well as to prevent the complications. Yeah, Dr. Raju. Okay. So anybody has any idea how to deal with his thoughts of being liability, and how can we help his wife to cope with the present situation?
Psychotherapy is very important in this case, and it has to be long term. He has to be motivated, because all these people will go in for a tailspin as he is doing now, and it's very difficult to bring them back. But he should be motivated continuously. And his main concern, as Madam was saying, is financial. So he's not able to take care of his family because there's no other earning member in the family. His wife is not, probably trained enough or educated enough to go for some work. So, but he is only a paraplegic. He's not a quadriplegic. He has got the use of his hands. So, as you said, he could be trained for some desk-based job where NGOs can help, or probably government grants, government portal avenues are there where such people can be helped. So that once if he finds that he is useful to himself, to the family, and to the society, then he will have a motivation to live and come out of his cyclical depression. So I think that is very important. The psychosocial constant. It's not just a one-off kind of thing. It has to be a constant motivation, a constant kind of encouragement and counseling, which is needed. Because I have seen one patient who was a paraplegic, but you won't believe he's so motivated that he drives a car. He had modified his car to such an extent where he can accelerate, he can change the gears with his hands, and he can even brake with his hands, and it has been modified. And he said, okay, this is something which God has given me, but then again, God also has given me the willpower to live. And he is earning, he is taking care of his family, and they are having a fantastic life. it was hats off to him. So I think people can be motivated even in paraplegic situations to lead as normal a life as possible within their constraints.
Yes, thank you. So let's ask Mukta, what are her thoughts about the various psychosocial aspects that Dr. Veronica has mentioned here?
Yes. First of all, it was wonderful listening to all of you guys discussing, because you all have definitely come up with very valuable points and suggestions here, some of which I also had in mind. So definitely all these points of, making them as financially independent as possible, rather than just financial aid, making sure that they are engaged, both the wife and husband are engaged in something which brings in constant income. It might be, really little, but it has to be something that they earn by themselves. That is definitely going to mean a lot. And for that, yes, mobilizing him in a wheelchair, definitely. So that is one major part. Secondly, is when we speak about his thoughts of being a liability, there are two parts to it. One is the social conditioning which happens, where considering that he's a man, feeling of being useful to the that he's a breadwinner, that he earns money, right? Which does not happen with women, if you go to see, because women do all household. So they won't really feel like they're a liability if they stop earning. So in this case, we need to help him identify other sources of being useful, other than earning money or being the breadwinner. There are so many things that he can do. As somebody said, he is paraplegic, sitting in a wheelchair. There are so many things that he will be able to do. We also need to find out what are his educational qualifications. Is it possible for him to take the homework of his kids, probably, or help out in the kitchen, just things that he can do sitting, and definitely getting a desk job if possible. So all these things will definitely help him when it comes to dealing with his thoughts of being a liability. Another factor when it comes to feeling like he's a liability is also to do with the couple relation. When doctor has mentioned in a presentation that he's not able to meet the wife's expectations, so is that feeling of being a liability also coming from the way his wife talks to him, or how he makes him, or how she makes him feel? That also needs to be addressed. So couple therapy is also going to be very, very important. The relation between the husband and wife is going to really affect how he responds to any kind of other treatment that we provide. That's definitely there. And thirdly, when it comes to all the other issues, when it comes to reducing his fear, also about these thoughts of being a liability, and how to overall help him cope and deal with social stigma, there is something wonderful called acceptance and commitment therapy. You might have heard of it, you might not have heard of it, but please go and read up more on it. If you find somebody who is trained to do ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, it is definitely going to work wonders for this patient, or for that matter, for anybody who is suffering from a terminal or a degenerative or a life-limiting illness, because it will definitely help them find value in their life rather than looking at the basically all the limitations that they're forced to face.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mukta, for that important points. And I would also like to add one more point here. I think the communication with the patient and the family would be one of the most important thing that need to happen, because the patient has high hopes that he is going to work. So so we have to actually find out what is the insight of the patient regarding his regarding the spinal cord injury, what has happened, and it's also important to find out from his wife also. And I think from that point onwards we have to build up and probably we have to reduce his expectations and bring him to an acceptable level of what he can expect in the future. And then in addition to that, I think what all of you have told is very important. Any more points from anybody?
Sir, I would like to add one thing. The patient, as I read the slide, one of the point that he could not able to meet the expectations of the wife. He's 28, probably his wife is around 26, 27 something. Is involved of any sexuality and intimacy issues have we ever addressed in our clinical setups? And of course, it is very difficult to address when compared to the abroad, where the intimacy, the sexuality, the things, they are well versed and they have different logics in their own perspective in their domain. But when come to our Indian context, it's becomes difficult to encounter the sexuality issues, to talk, to discuss, to address. So how well we can do in this case?
Yeah. So this is an important issue, and Mukta has mentioned about this, even though she did not elaborate on this. She talked about the relationship issues. So this is one of the important issues. There is no doubt. And actually, I conducted a study, qualitative study among patients who had spinal cord injury about their intimacy problems. And what I found was everybody was very open to talk about that. But the only problem was that there was nobody to listen to it, or everybody, as you told, it is something like taboo or don't ask. That's what we usually do because we are shy and we neglect it. But the patients and families actually wanted to speak about it. And if you just start it, they are ready to talk about it, and they would like to find out some solution for that if possible. So that's what I got from my study.
Sir, can you please share your studies, sir, in the
yeah,
group?
I can send it. I have published it in 2 parts in Indian Journal of Palliative Care.
Okay, sir. Please kindly share. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Mukta, what's your opinion? Do you frequently get the intimacy problems of patients, and how do you deal with them?
Yes. They are, as you said, very open to talking about it, but they just need a safe space and a safe person to discuss these things with. So definitely, yes, I think they will be open to discussing about these, even in this case. Just if you get them the right professional who is, going to do it the right way and give the right prompts for them to start talking about it. And sometimes just venting out also helps a lot, because they don't know whom, like, these are things that because of the taboo, they're not able to talk about. All other frustrations they can share with the world, and the world is sympathetic about it. But this is something that they are not able to share with anybody. So just, even if they're able to vent it out, just that catharsis also helps a lot. And otherwise also helping them set realistic expectations in all areas. It can be sexual intimacy, it can be financial independence, it can be how well they are going to get. Realistic expectations is something that is very, very important. As Sir also highlighted, communicating and being transparent, and rather than giving false reassurances about all these things, is going to help them deal with it and accept it basically.
Another problem is that society's attitude. So whenever we see somebody who is paraplegic, everybody think that he is asexual. So this patient is usually neglected, and even family don't give privacy for this patient. He will be in a hall and wife will be in another room. So even I had one patient who actually get admitted in the hospital, not because he has some physical problems. He want to be with his wife for a few days. So that's where we admit both of them. So that's the only chance where they can both be in the same room. So these are some issues which actually we need to sensitize the society.
Absolutely, yes.
Ma'am, I have a question not related with the case. In bereavement, once the patient is no more there, when should we first visit the family? Because in palliative care extends to the family also post demise. So when should that first visit be, and how frequently should they be spaced, or it's just depending on the family's wish whether they want to continue?
It is going to be depending on the family's wish, and also it'll differ from case to case also, the spacing of sessions. Basically, the first visit is, we have to be very sure that the family wishes us to do that, because so usually what we do is we let them know that bereavement support is available, that this does not stop the moment the patient is no more. It extends to the entire family, etc., etc. And if they wish to continue, so we get a very verbal explicit consent, and then if that is there, then we wait for that. So usually all religions, all cultures will have that bereavement period, like a certain number of days. So we wait for that to get over, and we wait for all the rush of relatives and well-wishers to get over, and then we can start with then we can make our visit, basically.
But we may not know of how much is the mandatory bereavement period for other cultures. Then we wait for them to call us.
Yes, we always hand them one contact number, very explicitly state that, if you require bereavement support, if you feel like you need support in the grief and dealing with the grief, any kind of emotional support, you please contact on this number. So usually they will do that.
So we phrase it like, if you want to talk, or how do we phrase it? That
you can say, if you want to talk, you can. However, it's not always necessary to state explicitly about what you're going to do in grief support. You just need to let them know that we are here for you. If you ever feel the need for support, if you feel like getting in touch with us again, you can contact on this. Even that much is enough most of the times. Like they'll understand what you mean, but yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
So what we do is, when a patient dies, we usually calls them maybe after 2 weeks, within 10 to 14 days. so that that would be the time mostly the relatives will be going out from the
God.
home and they
Yes.
will be alone. So we have usually good relationship with the family members. So whenever we speak to them, they usually don't want to stop. They will continue to speak, and by that time the person who speaks to the family member will understand whether and they will also ask some questions like, are you able to sleep, are you able to adjust with the things like that, are you able
Yeah,
to eat,
self-care
and so
questions. Yes.
some questions also
Yeah.
in between. And if they think that okay, and at the end they will also tell them that if you have any problems, please let us know, we are here there for your support. And if the team also feels that this patient definitely needs in-person visit, one of our team including social worker, nurse and the doctor will go and visit them at home. And then they will explore more about the emotional situation of the family. And according to their need, we will also arrange a psychologist or somebody else if needed.
So who makes the call then? If from the team, somebody, or
Yeah,
the
usually,
palliative care physician himself should call?
no. Usually the nurse who is the regular nurse of that patient, who has been to the
Assigned
patient's home.
to the family.
Yeah.
But sir, if like in my case, I don't have a, I mean, I'm not attached to a palliative care unit. So as a family physician, so
Yeah.
then I make that call.
Yeah, definitely you can.
Right.
No doubt, because you are the person who has more close relationship with that family. So anybody who has a close relationship with the family would be the best person to talk to the family.
Thank you, sir.
And Dr. Vidyacharan, I think with this we will stop.
Yes, regarding this bereavement only, we have the CanCare Foundation and we are regularly doing this bereavement meeting every month. And we have the 21-year-old boy who lost his mother in December, and his father is also left the family by his 2 years of age. He is the only person taking care of his mother for the past 3 years, and during the end of life period also he is with the mother by all the times. We have seen him taking care of all those activities of his mother and everything. And after that, when he came for the bereavement meeting, we have conducted after 2 bereavement meetings have been done. And in those bereavement meetings, everyone is getting motivated by seeing him. But after those bereavement meetings, when we personally talk with them, he have a thought that, and he will frankly tell to us, I have some jealous that even everyone is coming and going with their families, but I don't know whom I have to come with and whom I have to go with. Means he doesn't have his father and he doesn't have his mother, and there is no other relations is also not helping with them. So at that time, we itself. So these things, how we can help him further, and we don't know actually. He's just doing his studies, I think so.
Yeah, we just need to keep in mind that when we talk of bereavement in this particular case, we're not talking about loss of a person. We're talking about loss of his entire social fabric. So we need to keep in mind that this is not simple bereavement. This is not just losing a mother. So bereavement is going to take more time, and it is definitely he will require one-on-one sessions. It's not just enough for a group session. And along with that, speaking of positives, we also need to start, helping him. Of course, when he's ready, don't force him. It's too early for this to happen. Maybe in another few months, let's say a total of 6 months after the passing of his mother, probably, we can start helping him look at other sources of, doesn't just have to be blood relatives. So how is it that he can deal with the isolation and he can start building up relationships? And can it be at the workplace? Can it be some other friends? Or, we can start helping him build healthier relationships, but much later.
What I done was in the last week, I personally called him, and he was near my home only. So I personally called him for a tea shop
Okay.
and I have some conversation with him.
Okay.
But I don't know whether
Okay.
it is correct way of approaching him or not. So only.
Yeah.
Because
No, it would
in giving
not.
now we
Yeah, if
can
you're
have some
saying
times and I can spend the time.
right.
At some point we may don't have time. At the time it may make him more isolated. So I feel it was something I have done wrong, or I don't know.
No, I agree that you did what you felt right at that point, but it's always better to, especially when you're a professional dealing with them, and especially in terms of psychosocial distress, it's always better to keep it professional, to not let it extend to outside of the organization, like going out with them, etc. And secondly, it's always better to not make them dependent on you for emotional support. Try and find out ways that he can be independent of you for emotional support. So you can help him find other sources of support, no doubt, outside of the organization. Doesn't mean you should distance him from the organization or from yourself, but that should be your priority, to make him independent and not dependent on.
Okay. Thank you. I think thank you, Mukta, for that wonderful session, and for also for active participation from all of you. And Dr. Veronica brought a good patient story, which also we were able to actually discuss many of the psychosocial issues. So once again, thank you, Mukta, and thanks everybody. It's over to Sri Priya.
Thank you, Mukta ma'am. Thank you all for joining us. We will see you in the next session. Okay, bye.